okay with air Consultative, thank you.
Fabulous, thank you very much. Okay, welcome everybody. I'm going to do my official introduction part now. So, hello everybody and welcome. My name is Councillor Katie Dye and I will be chairing today's meeting. At this point, I would like to clarify that whilst the meeting is being webcast live to enable public access, it is not being held as a public meeting in accordance with the Local Government Act 1972. As such, it is a remote consultative meeting of the Climate Emergency Advisory Committee. The consultative status of today's meeting means that some of the usual formalities will not take place at the start of the meeting. This also means that the committee will not be in a position to take any formal decisions, and any proposed actions that do require formal ratification will be referred to the next formal public meeting of the committee for approval. Please can I remind members to turn their microphone to mute when they are not speaking and to use the hand raising function to indicate they would like to speak as we move through the agenda. So can we start with introductions, please? I'll go through in alphabetical order. And first of all is Councillor Anderson.
Councillor Barry Anderson, Adlin Wharfdale Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Bowden.
Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Bowden, Roundhay.
Thank you. Councillor Carlisle.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlisle, Carlin Farsley Water.
Thank you. Councillor Carlisle.
Afternoon all, Councillor Ed Carlisle, Farnsworth and Riverside.
Thank you. Councillor Downs.
Councillor Rick Downs, Otley and Eden Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Hi everybody, Councillor Mike Foster for Ardsley and Robin Hood.
Thank you. Councillor Hannan.
Good afternoon everybody, Councillor Hannan for Headingley Hay Park.
Thank you. Councillor Harrington.
Good afternoon, Councillor Norma Harrington, Wetherby Ward.
Thank you. Councillor McCluskey.
Good afternoon, folks.
Councillor Adrian McCluskey, Farnley and Wortley.
Thank you. Councillor Newton.
Hi everyone, Councillor Newton, Oliver Newton, should I say, Morley South Ward.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rafiq. We can't hear you.
I was muted, apologies. Councillor Mohammed Rafiq, Chapel Allerton and Exec Board Member for Climate, Energy, Environment and Green Spaces.
Super, thank you. Councillor Shazad.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. Councillor Mohammed Shazad from the Moortown and Meanwood Ward.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Sorry, I was trying not to create feedback there. Councillor Eleanor Thompson, Guiseley and Rawdon Ward.
Thank you. And Councillor Tudor.
I haven't seen him join us, Chair, so I'll record his apologies for today.
Okay, thank you very much. So Councillor Thompson and Councillor McCluskey are actually in the same room as me, but we're on different laptops. So I'll try and press mute at the appropriate time. But if it's a bit squeaky, then that's probably because I haven't pressed it in time. Okay, thank you very much. Can officers now introduce themselves, please? Let's start with Polly.
Hi, good afternoon. Polly Kirk, Chief Officer for Climate, Energy and Green Spaces.
Thank you. Do we have Chad yet?
Chad, I think, is watching the live stream rather than in the meeting, but Rachel is on now.
Super. Okay, so Rachel, do you want to go next?
Yeah, Rachel Wainwright, Policy Officer, Climate, Energy and Green Spaces.
Thank you. Helen?
Hi everyone, my name's Helen Gray and I'll be clerking today's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Cassie?
Cassie Sivapalan, Governance Services.
Thank you very much. Mariana?
Mariana Pexton, Director of Strategy and Resources, here for one of the items today. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have George yet?
No, he'll dial in at the beginning of his item.
Okay. And do we have Tony?
No, he's going to do the same.
Super, thank you very much. So is there anybody I have missed? Okay, you are all very welcome to today's meeting then. So Helen, would you like to run through the formalities at the beginning?
Thank you, Chair. We've received no apologies for absence, but I note Councillor Tudor is not here yet. So if he doesn't join us, I will note his apologies for today. Could I ask members to make any declarations of interest that you may wish to make at this point? Can't see any hands raised, so thank you, members. And just to add, we don't have any late items. We did have a supplement which I published and sent round on Thursday, and that relates to agenda item 7, the domestic air source heat pump installation. There's a supplement for members to read, and hopefully you've received that on time. And that's it from me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Okay, so that moves us on to item number 3, which is the notes of the previous meeting. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through them page by page, and if you have any comments or matters arising, can you indicate at the appropriate time? So starting on page 5. Page 6. Can I just note that on the second paragraph of page 6, we were going to make sure that members received presentation slides, which they should have done, and also copies of responses sent to contributors to the open forum, which should have gone out too. Okay, page 7. Page 8. Page 9, page 10, page 11, and page 12. Okay, thank you very much. So we can agree those. We're now on to item 4, which is open forum. Do we have John Illingworth with us?
Can't actually see him at the moment, Chair.
Chair, he did contact me probably a few minutes ago. We've just sort of struggling to locate the login details, so I've just resent them through for him. So hopefully he should be joining us momentarily.
Thanks, Rachel.
Okay, let's give him a minute or so, shall we? I don't want to go too long because I know that Mariana, who's next, has to leave us at 3.
I can see if I can contact him. If I just drop off the call momentarily, Chair, if you'd like.
That would be lovely, Rachel.
Yeah,
and if he's struggling to get in, but he is available, then maybe he could come in after item 5.
Yeah, I won't be a second.
Councillor Carlisle.
Just while we're here and waiting, can I just ask what the state of play with around kind of 4G pictures? And I'm sure there have been allegations that, or suggestions that this board hasn't sufficiently kind of chewed upon the response from Sports England. Or is that fair, or are there updates that I've missed? Or
In terms of the response that we shared, which I think you all should have got a copy of, there is still some ongoing discussion with the person who came to the open forum, and we're currently constructing a response after her response to the email that was sent from Sports England, which there were some issues she disputed with the position of Sports England. So when that response has been constructed, we'll share that with everybody.
do we know when that's due? That's possibly an impossible question, but
I don't know when it's due. imminently, I would say.
Right.
Do you think we'd be best to proceed with Mariana's presentation and then?
I do. I was giving Rachel a minute to come back, but I do at this stage, yes. Is that okay, Mariana? Are you able to move up the agenda and we'll pick up John if he joins us later?
Yeah, of course I am. I'll just share my screen, if that's okay. I'm not as familiar with Zoom, not using it all the time in the same way as we do Teams, but
no,
fingers crossed. Looks like you. Have you got?
I think we can see it.
Is that on? Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much for the opportunity to come and update you today. I mean, as people know, I'm relatively new into the role, and it's a broad brief, so I'll do my best to do justice to the wide range of things that are going on across the directorate, and obviously take any questions, suggestions away. But just in terms of managing expectations, if I can't answer detail, then, you know, as I say, I can get back to people. Second thing to say, you know, thanks as ever to Polly and Chad and the broader team, because a lot of what we do, you know, is based on advice, you know, that kind of expertise that we're lucky enough to have in the organisation. So whilst I'm saying that the directorate does all this stuff, you know, it is very much and often, you know, kind of in partnership with other colleagues as well. So they were just a couple of things to mention, and I can share the slides afterwards. They have been a bit of a last minute, I'll be honest. So weren't quite ready in advance to share with members, but can follow the meeting. So just a quick one to mention the role of the directorate, and in particular I thought it was probably important to say this because when Neil has been to this meeting in the past, he was here as the lead for Net Zero as well as leading the broader directorate, whereas that lead, as you know, has shifted with Polly and to James. So I thought it was worth just mentioning the kind of twin roles, if you like, of the directorate. One is about that, you know, the kind of support service functions and making sure we provide organisational leadership on those. And the other is, you know, providing that wide range of services, particularly through civic enterprise leads, but also the contact centre as well, you know, that hopefully do make a positive difference to the public, often to those who need them most. But as I say, kind of that caveat that the role has changed with Neil no longer being in the role. So I'm going to do a quick update. There's just a slide or two for each of the areas. I'll just pick out one or two things on them. You'll notice some consistent things through them where most service areas, you know, do have this topic on their meetings. We're all doing hybrid working. Lots of us doing, you know, kind of reducing the printing that we have and that we do, and, you know, trying to make as many energy savings as we can. So there'll be some common themes coming through, as well as some that are specific to each service area. So the role of Legal and Democratic in particular, I would say it's mainly two things. One is mainly providing advice and working with Polly and others on a lot of the major developments that we've done in relation to this area over a long period of time. And the second thing is, you know, as we've got Helen here today, you know, making sure that relevant meetings are supported, and that, you know, things like the report template and that kind of thing, to make sure that when we're making decisions, you know, we're making them in light of what that kind of the net zero impact will be. So I won't say any more on that one. Finance is very similar to legal, lots of range of advice. Victoria's teams will often be, you know, members of colleagues
Can
who
I
are...
just pause
sorry.
there a minute, Mariana? Should the slides have moved on? Because mine...
Yes. Yeah, it should be on finance now, has it not?
No, I'm still on the first one.
Let me just attach from a second screen to see if that helps.
It's not gone into slideshow, so it's still on
there.
Oh, it has now. Yeah, so it's caught up. So you're on legal.
Did that move then now to finance?
So you're on
okay.
finance now.
I've taken the second screen off. It must have been because I had additional screen. Sorry, thank you for interrupting there, Chair. Sorry, I was going away in blissful ignorance. As all I could see, it was from me, it was on the right one. So finance, similar to legal, lots of advice and support provided across a range of capital schemes, revenue schemes, to Polly and the broader team. Too many to mention there, but a good few fairly significant ones. There's a lot of big numbers in the budget that relate to this agenda, as colleagues will know. And then in particular, recently we've been making sure that the capital programme has been refreshed and all those schemes have been considered through a challenge group linking to Strategic Investment Board. And the template did include a section for the impact in terms of net zero, so that decisions were made in light of that. Regrettably, we're not in a luxurious position where we can have loads of new investments that help us in this direction without kind of getting supplementary funding from other places. A lot of our capital programme will be around health and safety, but where we can consider it, then we do consider it. There's a lot happens on procurement, and Polly was keen to make sure this was included, although I think you did have it earlier in the year, but recognising that there were some new members on the board. So procurement, likewise, again, they'll often be part of that multidisciplinary team that Polly pulls together to, you know, maybe bid for funding and then deliver a scheme, and make sure that we're kind of got the right kind of commercial support. Where we've got procurement to do, particularly about some sustainability initiatives, for example, flood alleviation or electric vehicles, trying to make sure our procurements do have an element of sustainability requirements in them, as well as the broader social value. So in particular for those contracts above 5 million, where there is a carbon reduction plan, and there's a list of some of the examples that might feature in that carbon reduction plan, as well as obviously social value being considered more broadly, and trying to join up with the anchor institutions across the city to make sure that there is a more of a single approach. Not quite there yet, I don't think, but to try and aim for that, and try and make sure that we are simplifying procurement processes, particularly for some of the smaller contracts. Integrated digital services, again, a lot of these colleagues, obviously, you have the thing I mentioned before about printing and staff communications, etc. But also, obviously, the move to the cloud is really significant in terms of reducing the footprint that we have, and making sure that those partners that we're working with on the cloud, like Microsoft, for example, that they also have strong net zero policies when we're procuring and entering into those partnerships. Clearly, IDS has made a big contribution around kind of hybrid working devices, I guess not least during the pandemic, enabling us all to work remotely and do lots of recycling, and then trying to, as you know, we're trying to rationalise the number of applications. We do have hundreds of applications across the organisation. Clearly, you know, we're a big complicated organisation, but we've been trying in recent years to rationalise where we've got some things that do similar things, so that we only have one of those and only one, therefore, to maintain, and minimises the impact on physical infrastructure. Human resources and shared services. As colleagues know, we've been doing a lot around management development and engagement. And I think, you know, my recollection that we were working with Chad and Polly not long before the pandemic about carbon literacy, and that's probably something we need to pick up to think about how can we cover that, you know, potentially as a mandatory option within the Be Your Best programme, in the way that we have done EDI, and we are looking to do other things, given its importance to the organisation and to the city. We've trialled a carbon footprint tracking app, but I've not seen the evaluation, and would need to make sure that was definitely, you know, kind of worthwhile. But it's, you know, I guess using digital for some of these developments is quite a good opportunity. We still have a number of travel schemes in place, and we are encouraging, you know, colleagues, partly through the financial challenge, if I'm honest, as well as through the fact that we've got a corporate travel plan to minimise travel unless it's absolutely essential. So I'm fairly confident we'd be compliant with that, but we do need to probably have a check. Again, members of this board, I think probably will be aware we did the grey fleet car use policy just before COVID, I think. And obviously that's been disrupted. It probably needs reviewing next year to just recheck those timescales are realistic. And then, as I say, HR again, like every other service area, do use this as part of engaging with staff to make sure that staff understand the direction and the role that every individual can play in terms of their contribution. Then we move on to civic enterprise leads. There's a few slides for this and some of them are quite detailed, but there is probably quite a lot going on. Bear in mind, you know, civic enterprise leads around about 3,000 staff. So, you know, it's a lot of people doing a lot of things and providing very frontline services. So possibly, you know, more opportunity to drive carbon reduction. So in Clean and FM, and again, you'll see some consistent themes running through this, like, for example, switch to electric vehicles and building efficiency, staff education, but also in this one, passenger transport, particularly trying to use technology to make sure that we've got the most efficient routing of vehicles when we're, you know, taking children and young people to school or elderly people to where they're going, just try and making sure that we're doing that as efficiently as we possibly can. For Leeds Building Service in particular, trying to make sure that our procurement decisions have a focus on sustainability, whether that's, as the example there, trying to make sure that you know, we have provision from a range of different locations so that colleagues have access to the materials closer to their job location or their home location to minimise the amount of travel. And another key one here is trying to make sure that operatives are up to speed and able to operate those renewable technologies as and when they're available. Moving on then, fleet services. This is obviously a big one and one that Neil and Polly will have updated you on, you know, on numerous previous occasions. I'm sure, you know, it has been something that Leeds has been on the front foot with and had a probably larger than most people. Most local authorities have had a bigger electric corporate fleet, and that has been growing all the time. Trying to make sure we recruit well so that we can continue to drive that around renewable energy. And then recent procurement exercise, particularly around electric refuse vehicles, you know, is very, very, very significant. And fleet colleagues have been, you know, involved in doing presentations to others, because I think because of the work that colleagues and you know, have done with Polly, then, you know, there is material that we can use to help influence others as well. And then catering, again, a big one. You know, we do provide lots of food. We have 1,000 staff or so in catering leads, and we provide lots of meals every day to schools and during the holidays. So I think this is a service, again, where Polly and colleagues have worked really closely with to make sure any accreditation schemes that we can use to help drive the right behaviour are used. And that, you know, we have those locally based suppliers, and we use electric vehicles, recycled boxes that, you know, quite a little while ago, you know, during the pandemic or just before the pandemic, sorry, went, you know, to 1 meat-free day and 1 vegetarian day a week, and offering more plant-based options, which is growing. Looking at which other ones to particularly pick out. Yeah, developing a carbon calculator is in particular, you know, to try and calculate the carbon footprint of school meals, but importantly then use that as an engagement tool with schools to try and get everybody to do their bit. And the last one there, research partnership with the University of Leeds, just to make sure that we are, you know, kind of using local universities to help us on an ongoing basis with what best practice looks like. And then strategy and performance. This is the eclectic mix of services that, you know, ranging from emergency planning through to strategy and communications. So again, working with Polly and Chad and others, we did have a climate adaptation workshop last year, which felt like it was really good attendance, actually really good engagement, really good conversations, and good things have come out of that in terms of things like the heatwave task and finish group, and just people being more aware and more ready for those developments, and being more ready to deal with the variety of severe weather issues that we face, whether that's flooding or hot water, and making sure that we use our warning and informing range of channels around poor air quality alerts as well when that happens. Mike Eakins and colleagues work closely with Polly on net zero, the annual report, and making sure that we really feed that through into the best city ambition and our KPIs, and obviously our teams working closely on communication campaigns with Polly and the team, and also, from my point of view as well, making sure that we do have that messaging in member and partner updates so that we, keep this on people's minds as much as we possibly can. So in terms of conclusions, it's fair to say, it's been obviously a real good learning curve for me, to be honest, to reflect on what we do. So I appreciate the invitation. We do clearly do a lot, but I guess as always with these things, there is always more to be done as well. So, we'll make sure we keep it in our conversations, in our work programmes, and very happy to take any questions or comments or suggestions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. And obviously the work that you've described is absolutely crucial in terms of us meeting our net zero ambitions as a council. So I would really welcome from members of the committee any questions about what you've seen or any suggestions of things that could move this work on. So if you'd like to comment, can I see an electric hand, please, or electronic hand? Okay, Councillor Thompson. I've muted, so
see. Thank you. It's quite a specific one, so it may need to go to somebody else, but particularly about electric vehicle charging for people with mobility vehicles who are being pushed towards electric vehicles, who are living in council properties, so retirement life bungalows, particularly younger people using electric mobility vehicles living in council properties, but all ages. It's a question that's come up specifically in our ward. It may be this isn't the place for it, but thought it perhaps worth a mention. Thank you.
Thank you. Are you able to comment on that, Mariana?
Polly's put a hand up because I would imagine that's a housing.
I can't hear you. I know Polly's wanting to come in, and I will bring Polly in. But did you want to?
I could hear Mariana. So yeah, Mariana was.
Oh, hang on. Is it because I muted myself? Sorry, Mariana. Did I? I think I muted myself so that it wasn't echoing when Councillor Thompson.
So Mariana basically said she thinks it's more of a housing issue, which is pretty much what I was going to say. So there is work going on with colleagues in housing to look at our sort of housing estates and things, but it's maybe something we pick up when James comes, and I can take that back to our senior leadership team to make sure we reflect and come back to you in between times, Councillor Thompson.
Is that okay? Happy with that? Yeah. Just for people who are new, I did mean to introduce this item by saying that we have a rolling programme throughout the year of inviting all the directors. So at that point, then perhaps you might want to re-ask that question. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Anderson?
Just briefly, when you put up the points that you provide, I think it was 21 home electric charging points. Do you mean you've installed it at the council member's home, or do you mean at premises owned by the council you've constructed 21 home charging points?
Again, I might have to defer to Polly, but my understanding would be it's the latter, not the former.
No, it isn't. No, it's not.
Is
it's
it?
at people's homes. So yeah,
We-
sorry, Mariana. So
No, it's all right. I'll say I'm learning.
Yeah, so we've
So-
installed charge points at people's homes,
Right.
and then we repay their electricity, so it's separately metered. So it's a more cost-effective way quite often of recharging. There's not enough electrical capacity on our estate to charge all our vehicles, and people operationally quite often take vehicles home.
Right, and so does that lead to any tax implications for the member of staff? Not suggesting that they would use it for personal use. I'm not trying to infer that, but are there any tax implications for the member of staff who's had that installed when other members of the public would have to pay to get it installed?
No, because it's only for council use, and it's metered against the vehicle.
Okay.
I can get a thorough answer back because I've not been directly involved in the installation and review of the tax. But
because I know sometimes as somebody who used to have a company car that things can get very, very complicated tax-wise. That was where I was coming from. It wasn't trying to trip anybody up. It was just generally. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wanting to ask a question or make a suggestion? Okay, is your hand still up from before, Councillor Anderson? Oh, Councillor Harrington.
Oh, it's me, sorry. And this may have been raised elsewhere before previously, but I'm new to the SEP board. So we've had quite a few people in our area asking us about smoke-free zones. Now, we know that we've got the clean air policy in the city centre, Polly, I fully understand that, but they're concerned about the upsurge in wood-burning stoves, so that people who were previously living in an area that was smoke-free, and yes, they may well have slightly lower problems with car fumes, etc. But now, because their next door neighbours have now got a wood burning stove, they open their windows and they're getting wood smoke coming into the houses. So where is the best place to raise that about introducing smoke-free zones in areas that previously haven't had to consider that?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, Polly.
So the enforcement of smoke-free zones again sits with James as Director of Communities, Housing and Environment. So Paul Spandler heads up that environmental enforcement side, but it's very, very challenging to actually enforce, because actually you can only enforce if people aren't following the regulations. So you can still have wood burners, it's actually what they're burning and things. So I think there's more that you can do via awareness, raising awareness and making people understand actually the implications. I think at full council last week, we've been asked to bring a paper back to exec board around air quality. So again, we'll pick up on that and reflect on it in there. So I think that's where it will start to come back out, and we could obviously bring the air quality one here or to one of the working groups beforehand for discussion in a bit more detail. So it's an initial view, but it's still an area, I agree, where there's probably a lot more work, but actually national policy doesn't necessarily allow us to enforce in the way that people would like us to.
Thank you, Polly. Did you want to come back on that, Councillor Harrington? Okay, I mean, I would absolutely agree that it is something that we do need to look at, and perhaps we could find a way in SEP to do that. Okay, anybody else with any questions or comments? Right, in that case, Mariana, can I pick up a few of my own then, please? The first one was on the procurement slide, when you talked about joining up with other Leeds anchors. I know you said that that's something that needs further work, and I just wanted to ask, do you know if climate change is a feature of that further work specifically in terms of joining up about social value?
Yes, it is. There's a procurement subgroup with the anchors, but also net zero more generally, you know, is a feature of anchor conversations. Certainly the one or two I've been in most recently, it is. I'll have to get you a more detailed update. The procurement group has, it's slowed down a bit just with some personnel changes, not just for us, actually for another partner in recent months, but is actually just beginning to pick up pace again. So I can let you know what the position is with that anchor group.
That would be brilliant, thank you. And then my next one was on the human resources slide. One of the things that you mentioned was carbon literacy training, and that's something that we've discussed more than once at SEAC, and we're really keen for that to progress throughout the council. So I don't know if you had any further details on exactly where that's at.
I think we'd have to pick that conversation up and have a think through with Polly and the team about what our target audience, you know, are we after, you know, senior colleagues, are we after that group of 2,200 managers where we've just done the EDI training, or are we after something, you know, for all colleagues, like we sometimes do with things like information governance, etc., health and safety, DSE training. So we'd need to regroup. I was involved in the conversations some considerable while ago with Polly and Chad about what our options might be. But I think then, to be honest, COVID did get in the way. So I'd be keen to pick up those conversations and have a think through what we think's the, you know, the best approach to that over a reasonable period of time so that it could have the biggest impact.
That would be really good, because we've said at previous meetings that that's something that we're really keen to promote. For officers and for members as well. Okay, can I move on to travel then, please? We had an item at a previous meeting about corporate travel plan, and we were keen as a committee to look at that being a big feature really of the work that directors are talking about. So I know you've said that you're encouraging that, and also that the grey fleet policy is going to be renewed. It might be something that we could look at again in SEAC if people are interested in doing that. I see a few nods. I think that would be something that it would be good to maybe bring to a working group and us to have a look at.
Yeah, I'd be very happy to do that. I think probably realistically in 2024, maybe the early part of 2024.
Yeah, that would be good. Are people happy for that? Okay. And last one from me. The climate adaptation and resilience workshop, which I think was an excellent thing for council to have done. Is there follow-up work happening with that?
Polly might know more than me on this one, to be honest. I haven't asked recently. I mean, my sense is there was some good follow-up work, both on you know, us reacting to things. So like, for example, the heatwave guidance, I think specifically came from that, and some revisions to other you know, our responsive emergency plans. In terms of the broader, you know, kind of adaptation, I'm probably less sure.
So from our point of view, we're part of the Yorkshire and Humber Climate Commission's adaptation programme. So there are different groups of councils looking at very specific services. So for example, waste or bereavement services. So rather than us have to look at every service in depth, we'll be sharing knowledge across the whole of the Yorkshire and Humber. So that's kind of the next stage, I think, from our point of view. And then just working with some specific services, I'm keen that we look at green spaces and look at parks and consider adaptation, for example, in there, because actually there's quite a lot around shading or water features or things around that, or playground equipment. But it's sort of early stages, I'd say, that next part, but there is more work to do.
Thank you very much for that, Polly. Anybody got any last questions or comments? Okay, so thank you for coming, Mariana. We've come in below your 3 o'clock deadline, so
thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Time to present and prepare the slides, and very much appreciated.
No worries, and we'll follow up on those things.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Councillor Dye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, so I see that John is with us. So, John, we moved on to item 5, director's update, because Mariana had to go and we didn't know.
Indeed, very wise, very wise.
But it's good to see you. So we'll go back to the open forum. So again, just to remind people that we invite people who have something that they'd like to talk to us about that's relevant to our agenda to come in an open forum slot, and they get 5 minutes to talk to us. And we're delighted to welcome John Illingworth, who some of you may know.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I hope that Leeds City Council will soon become a major participant in zero carbon energy market, supply, demand and policy. And I want to bring up some difficult issues which presently constrain our switch over to carbon free. So there's sore points that need attention. And start off with high demand areas. Both renewable energy resources are distributed fairly evenly across the planet, more in some places than in others, but no great concentration in any particular spot. In contrast, demand for renewables can be very peaky, both in time and space. Demand is concentrated in tiny spots where the renewable energy available doesn't balance. We've already seen this connecting high-rise blocks to ground source pumps. It's much easier when each tower block is surrounded by significant open space, which can provide a heat source and accommodate our numerous boreholes. So you couldn't do a high-rise adaptation in a confined space. Town and city centres are much more difficult to service. The town centres' tightly focused demand far exceeding the local heat supply. There's an interesting failure mode described in the engineering literature, where new heat pumps initially deliver sparkling performance only to quickly deteriorate over the first few years. Their ground source is unbalanced. It's too small to meet demand, so fresh heat doesn't diffuse in fast enough to replace the heat that's been withdrawn. And the result is a frozen underground iceberg, I think is what you might describe it as. It's underground, it doesn't work, and you have lots and lots of dissatisfied tenants. Heat networks, hot and cold heat networks. These problems can be reduced if each individual heat pump serving one property is networked with other local pumps, thus spreading the load more evenly. There are two types of heat network: a hot version, which joins the pump hot outputs together, and a cold version, which joins the cold outputs together. We've got both types in Leeds, but they don't cost the same price. The hot networks can be very expensive because the whole network must be thermally insulated. Cold networks can be much more economical with much less insulation required. They operate much closer to ambient temperature. Cold networks also work well with phase change materials, which can store thermal energy for days or weeks, or even to even out supply and demand. I want to look at water source heat pumps. Water provides some good examples of phase change effects. At normal room temperature, it takes about 1 calorie per gram of water to change the temperature by 1 degree. If you switch to 0 Celsius and freeze your sample, it will release about 80 calories per gram of stored latent heat. Similar things are possible with hot networks when water turns to steam, but once again, the hot system needs expensive safety precautions, thermal insulation, and the cold alternative is cheaper and safer. Water is an excellent working fluid and energy flows back and forwards between heat pumps and thermal storage. Now, it's obvious to me that people living in coastal and estuarine settlements should be pumping an awful lot more heat from the sea. It's by far the best source available to them. And I suspect it's the best source several miles inland as well. And so I would expect to see a big increase in water source pumps from the sea all around our island coast. We shall see who's right about that, but that's my prediction. I'd like to mention finally the picture of pipes, PIPES, which is a local system that harvests energy from our waste processing at the Ruhr. The planning process for this started literally in the last century. And I traced through 30 years of committee meetings, gradually assembling the type concept on the ground. And there's no doubt that the fact that incinerator does an excellent job disposing of noxious waste and minimising our exposure to landfill. The original remit, that's what people originally set out to build in the back end of the last century. It does seem to deliver exactly on what was asked for. But it's difficult to understand the logic of calling it a low carbon scheme. Pipes is very largely a conventional combined heat and power scheme. It burns carbon, it makes CO2. That's the problem. And it has the unfortunate side effect of locking the council into a hugely expensive, high temperature distribution network. And it's inhibiting the development of more modern techniques. In my view, the best way forward would to run down pipes to the point where it can just handle the toxic waste while trying to improve our recycling rates, adopting more modern waste processing methods. Well, thank you very much for your attention. I hope to read a response in due course to some of the problem areas, they are problems, and see how we're going to tackle these things and fulfill our function as a major force in the land. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you for taking the time to prepare that and come and talk to us. And we will most certainly prepare you a response. I would imagine it needs to be quite technical to deal with some of the issues that you've raised, but I would look forward to sending that to you.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, John. Do we have anybody else for open forum, Rachel?
No, Chair. It was just John on this occasion.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the time, John. Nice to see you again. Okay, in that case, let's move on to item 6. So item 6 is our working groups update, and we have 2 groups that have met since the last meeting, one of which is the one chaired by Councillor Anderson, and one of them is the one chaired by Councillor Carlisle. Carlisle. So, seeing as yours was the one that met earliest, Councillor Carlisle, do you want to give us a brief update, please?
I can, thank you. Yeah, I was just saying to Councillor Carlisle the other day that every time his name's read out in the chamber, I panic thinking that I haven't written a speech that I should have given. So that's all fine. So we had a meeting of the Finance and Economy Working Group earlier in the summer. There was only one item on that, which was to discuss the exec board report on options for climate finance. So that came out of the white paper from the full council meeting in January, requesting to provide a report on green municipal bonds and community mutual investments. And then obviously that white paper resolved to produce a report to executive board. So we had a look around that, some really positive figures in what was there. One of the highlights was that the council has spent now £500 million over the last 5 years in various projects to reduce carbon emissions and for climate mitigation. The summary of the report, so that went to executive board in July as noted, so if anyone wants to look it up, it'll be available to read on the exec board in July's papers and minutes. It summarised really that green municipal bonds or community mutual investments may be something we want to look at in the future, but to date there wasn't a specific project that we had saw that they could be aimed about. I don't know if Polly wants to come in further on any of that after in the terms of the detail. We then had a good discussion about what other items we'd want to see come to that working group in the future. So there's a bit of a discussion around sustainable procurement and getting another update on that, which we heard obviously from Mariana earlier. Whether we could have some more discussions with local finance companies, Leeds Building Society, Yorkshire Bank, etc., around what they're doing in this area and green finance options that they can promote locally. And I think we were keen to have another update from the Green Finance Institute on some of the work that they're doing. There was a bit of a conversation around skills as well, because obviously it's economy and skills working group, and skills we're going to talk a bit later on today around installation of heat pumps, etc. And one of the problems there is making sure we've got enough people with the skills to develop all the options that we need to remove carbon from the various systems that we've got. So I think going into skills is something we really want to do, to look at how we tackle that and hear from what the City Council are doing among with our colleagues in the skills teams there, to see how we can tackle some of those gaps. Bit of an update there. I don't know if there's anything that Polly wants to come in with any further detail.
No, I think that was comprehensive.
Super, thank you very much. Anybody got any questions on the Finance and Economy Working Group? Okay, so in that case, thank you for chairing that as always, and thank you for your contribution today. So let's go over to Councillor Anderson for biodiversity, food and waste update, please.
Right, we discussed community growing challenges and opportunities, because there are significant challenges. For example, in terms of land use, there is no unified mechanism within the council for actually recording what land is used for what, and different directorates have a different way of approaching this. So we need to try and come up with either a unified way of dealing with it, or to issue instructions to various departments as to how we expect this to be dealt with. Now, coming from that, we do need to get some flexibility built into it, because one or two organisations have tried to use the land, but they keep coming up against what I'll call council officialdom, getting in the way of good ideas, because members of the public just cannot put up with bureaucracy. They just want to get on with it. They're not really too bothered about, I mean, the example we talked about was getting legal agreements signed. Look, they just want to get on and do it. But we want to spend time making sure that every dot and comma in terms of legal agreement, we also want to try and come up with individual legal agreements. No, let's just come up with a standard legal agreement that people can use on council land and move it forward from there. We also discussed about the mapping of assets. Again, there's no map of all Leeds City Council assets. There are various maps of various things, but there is no combined map bringing it all together. So we need to look at in bloom land, we need to look at where there are trees planted, we need to look at where there is public open space. We need to have an asset register so that we can see where everything is and how we can utilise that a lot better. In terms of biodiversity, there are a number of challenges, because some members of the public don't understand why we have got wild meadows in various locations, why we're not cutting verges as much as has been done in the past. We need to explain more fully to people how that's going to happen. Then we also discussed surplus food. If you have windfall, for example, ex-councillor Illingworth, I know, produces a heck of a lot of fruit and veg at his house. He tries to use a lot of it himself, but he does have some excess left over. So how do we utilise that? How can we get a hold of that? How can we find a collection point so that everybody who's got windfall in their garden from fruit trees, how can that be collected up, taken to a central location? What happens if someone is producing something of a good quality, but they're actually producing more than they need locally? How do we get it? So the example given was Seacroft could almost certainly use any of that excess, but how do we physically get it to them? Is there a collection point? So we need to look at how we're going to deal with surplus food. And the final thing we looked at were allotments. We need more allotments in the city, but we don't necessarily need the size of allotments that the council currently operates, so that in your lease. So we need to look and see if we can get smaller numbers. Now, how can we go about dealing with some of those issues? For example, you know, could community committees purchase some land using SIL monies or some other form and then convert them into allotments? Where would that land come from? Is it going to be from council land? Because a lot of the council land that we would like, our planners have got their BDIs on it for potential housing sites or employment sites. So we've got a problem there. In some other parts of the city, we're looking to try and install solar farms, you know, sometimes in agricultural areas. So what's the best use of this land? We need to have an open and honest debate about how we're going to move that particular thing forward. How can we build in with neighbourhood plan groups? Because they've become more and more popular, not just in the outer areas of the city, but the inner city areas are getting more and more neighbourhood plans. Have they identified sites within there? Do they have maps that we could get a hold of that would help bring all of this mapping together? And should we look, for example, I sort of share my garden. There are some people who have got large gardens, but don't have the means to currently do any work in it anymore. Unfortunately, Anna Domini has taken over and they can't do it as much. There's maybe not, but so could we have some mechanism for people to join in with that person, do the hard work, and in return be able to get some of the fruits of that labour, not metaphorically as well. So there's going to be more comprehensive notes coming out because we only had the meeting on Friday, so for you to read. But that's given you a flavour of the direction. It was a really good meeting, even though I say so myself, that there was a lot discussed, a lot of issues raised, and certainly the next time we're on one, I would suggest that you clear your diaries so that we can have these ongoing debates and discussions as well. That's it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Anderson, and an excellent summary. I have to agree. Any questions or comments on biodiversity and food working group? Okay, well, it was, as Councillor Anderson said, it was only on Friday, and I think we've raised, as I hope you got a flavour of in the summary, an awful lot of things that we could be looking at. So I would echo Councillor Anderson's suggestion that when the group meets next, you all come along and can feed into that discussion, because I think it's really, really important and it's relevant to all of us. So thank you very much. Okay, so that takes us on to item 7. And we've got George, I think, with a presentation. So would you like to start, George, with just a little introduction to people who don't know you, and then have you got a presentation to show us?
Sure, thanks a lot, Chair. Yes, I have a presentation which the first half will cover the Net Zero Homes Plan. Is similar to a paper you sent round, so I'll just rattle through that. And then the second half of the presentation is focusing on air source heat pumps, just to try and have a discussion on some issues that we are conscious are about to arise with installing heat pumps. But as a quick introduction, I'm George Munson. I work in Holly's team, so I lead our district heating work and retrofit, and it's very interested in Councillor Illingworth's comments on district heating just now. So I'll just share my screen and go through the presentation. So can everyone see this okay?
Yep, we can see it.
Has it gone on to full presentation mode?
No, it looks like this kind of the slide sorter bit.
It's not doing what I'm asking it to do. Let's minimize that. Hopefully you can still see it. For some reason it's not sharing it properly. So I'll just crack on with this.
Thank you.
So this is roughly what I'm planning to go through today. So just a quick update on our Net Zero Homes plan. I'll go through kind of 3 areas at a time and then pause for any comments just to keep it moving along. And then there's more of a substantive discussion on air source heat pumps, really looking at the barriers to installation that we're currently facing, and then having a look at a couple of options which are open to us, and very interested in your views on those options. So I will rattle through the Net Zero Homes plan. Just a reminder of what we're attempting to do. We want to go for more of the homes on the right, get rid of the finish of the homes on the left. It's ultimately what we're trying to do: insulate properties and put renewables on and low carbon heating. So we set ourselves when the last climate emergency report went to exec board, we set ourselves up with a net zero home plan, which picks kind of 6 main areas that we want to focus on to try to move ourselves forward in terms of creating the right environment for all of our homes to become net zero. Within some of those areas, we then set specific actions that we would try to achieve by certain dates. And so this just gives a quick update on our progress with those. So the first main area is just trying to create a way of retrofitting homes for the able to pay sector. So creating a retrofit hub and a finance mechanism. And we're committed that by the end of 2023, we'd establish something called the Better Homes Hub, which would then allow us to commence delivery of this within one community. We've been working closely with Lloyds and Octopus over the last year or so, and they've now jointly committed to invest in a privately run one-stop shop within Leeds, with Leeds sitting on a partnership board for that. So we're due to formalise an MOU within the next month or so, and Octopus is now advertised for the chief exec's job for that organisation. We think there's a real coup for Leeds that we've got the private sector coming in and investing in this. The council can support them, but we don't have to take the risk, and we don't have the financial obligations around setting up a one-stop shop. So we will get to deliver our policy intent without having to take some of the more difficult decisions we would have had to otherwise. And then linked to that, we'd committed that by the end of 2024 to create something of property-linked finance products as a means to allow people to invest in their homes without an upfront cost. The interesting thing with property-linked finance product is that the product stays with the property rather than the person. So when people move house, then that stays on the property, and whoever then benefits from the energy efficiency works is the person who's living in that house and paying the long-term cost of that work. So we were the only local authority to secure funds from the Green Home Finance Accelerator, and working alongside Lloyds and Arup, we've been doing some detailed research into this, looking at appetites for the finance products, and also looking at how we link it in with smart tariffs to maximise benefits to householders. The conclusion that we've come to is that we are likely to need a change to primary legislation to launch a fully fledged property-linked finance product, which is going to take time. But we've identified that we can create a pseudo property-linked finance where we link via an organisation called Lendology. We provide zero cost upfront cost to householders, and then we don't ask for that money back until the property is sold. So it allows us to test some of the details around PLF while we're dealing with what we need to have to do at a national level. We're also planning to bid to government for the next round of the Green Home Finance Accelerator, looking to secure just over £1 million, we think, to try this, to trial finance products in a live environment through the one-stop shop. And we've heard positive things back from government, so we are hopeful that we'll secure that funding. The next main area was engaging and motivating people to choose low carbon retrofit. So part of our work we did with the Green Home Finance Accelerator was to do some detailed work looking at attitudes and how do you persuade people to pick up retrofit. So a lot of it is about positioning, where we think that moving away from some of the kind of old messaging around, if you invest this, you will save that, which hasn't always resonated with people. We focus more on the benefits to people through increased comfort, increased property values, linking it to things which kind of make more sense to people in their kind of everyday life. We're likely to have a better uptake level. So we're happy with what we've done here, working with the West Yorkshire Combined Authority. They're looking to set up a service which provides this level of advice right across the region. So we're making, again, good progress on that objective. The next one was really building on the work that we've done in Holbeck. So trying to upscale area renewal investment to kickstart work on homes of all tenures. We put a bid as a council in for levelling up funding for Holbeck phase 3, which was unsuccessful. We've been working in the background to try and find a way to keep going with that work, and we've had positive discussions with civil servants and ministers around, what we've done in Leeds and Holbeck and how it could be applied nationally to avoid the situation where things like the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund only picks up on council homes. So you have this crazy street scene where some of the homes have been done and then a whole load haven't. So we've heard a whisper that there will be a scheme announced in the autumn statement in November that will be focusing on area-based retrofit. So we've started doing some work with colleagues in Housing Leeds and some of our contractors to look at getting ourselves ready with some back-to-back council homes and some private back-to-back homes that we can put forward as a single bid to this funding pot. So we're doing that survey work as we speak. And I'll pause there and just see if there are any questions or comments on those first three before I deal with the next three.
Thank you, George. Some really, really positive news there. Anybody got any comments or questions at this stage? I don't think so. I'm just scrolling all the way to the bottom, but I don't think I can see any hands. So please continue.
I will crack on. So next one was improving our planning framework and engaging with industry to ensure new homes reach net zero standards. I think at the last meeting you had an update from Adam Harvard about what we're doing with our core strategy. It's making really good progress. What we've put into that core strategy is really quite national leading work. So I think that is making adequate progress through its various approval stages. I think if you have any queries on it, we can pick up with Adam later. Then we're moving into the final two are more kind of creating the right sort of environment, slightly longer term. So one of the things that we committed to is trying to zone the city to look at what the most suitable fabric improvements were and heating improvements were by neighbourhood. So taking into account what the built form of the property is like and what the demographics are like in different areas to look at how can we then deliver area-based initiatives. We've been doing quite a lot of work with Parity Projects and the Energy Saving Trust to start to develop this map. And it's something that the West Yorkshire Combined Authority are now planning to do a local area energy plan for all of the West Yorkshire authorities. So that effectively will give us what we're looking for here. And the importance of this really is to help kind of guide us strategically when we're thinking about how do we create the business cases that we need for the different solutions, particularly on the heating side, so that we don't end up competing and having a really inefficient way of delivering works in different areas. And then the final one is trying to expand green job skills and supply chains to meet demands. So internally, we're doing a lot of good stuff on this, trying to link up the companies that we're working with, the contracts we're working with through our procurement process to make sure they pick up on apprenticeships and the like. The West Yorkshire Combined Authority has got this as one of their main priorities, so we continue to work with them. We don't have a clear progress report on that yet, but we do continue to engage. But there are some really encouraging sort of points coming forward from some of the companies that we're working with, where they're very keen to engage with Leeds City Council so that we can help them to recruit people with the skills they need, or to get people into employment on the lower skilled elements of work. So there's some quite encouraging steps forward there. Again, I'll pause for any comments or questions on those.
Thank you very much. Anybody like to comment at this stage or ask a question? Councillor Thompson.
Shuffling microphones again. Just yeah, as a member of the West Yorkshire Combined Authority Employment and Skills Committee, if I can be involved in that discussion in any way, please let me know if I can be of any support or help. Thanks.
Thank you. I can make sure we engage you with that.
Thank you for that. Anybody else with any comments? Any questions? That'd be really helpful, Councillor Thompson. Thank you. Just a comment from me really about how important this developing skills work is. You know, I've been in several meetings and workshops over the last year where it's raised as a real problem, you know, that people are fitting new technology like heat pumps, and they're fine when they work, but when they don't, finding somebody who understands the technology enough to be able to sort the problem out is really difficult. And as a council, we're now using a lot more of that technology, aren't we? I visited a site in Seacroft just a couple of weeks ago, and all the new houses have heat pumps. So just to say, I think that's really, really important work before we find ourselves in a difficult situation. So thank you.
Okay, so I will now go on to the second half of the presentation, which is I'll get it to move on. Yeah, focusing on air source heat pumps. So the background to this is we know that if we're going to get to our net zero targets, we've got to move away from gas heating. There's a lot of policy coming out of central government which is encouraging us to move to air source heat pumps or other low carbon heating sources. Within Leeds, we're fortunate we've got the district heating network, which has the potential to expand and use other technologies, kind of lower temperature technologies, to provide heating solution to denser areas of housing. But there are bits of Leeds, particularly in the kind of suburban and more rural areas, where we're never going to have any district heating that works. So we're going to need to have an alternative heat source, and air source heat pumps are good. They are more affordable than some of the other technologies, and if the home is relatively well insulated, they provide a good quality of heat. Where we've installed air source heat pumps on some of our projects, like the Holtdales, they've been universally accepted by the tenants. People appreciate moving away from storage heaters, particularly onto heat pumps, is a good thing. Even where we've changed gas boilers to heat pumps, they have still been popular. But there are some issues on the horizon in terms of installing heat pumps. The main issue is the lead-in time. If you want to change your boiler, if it goes bang, you can call up a gas engineer and have your boiler changed tomorrow. If you want to change from a gas boiler to an air source heat pump, sometimes you need to have approval from the DNO, from Northern Power Grid, and sometimes you need to seek full planning permission to have an air source heat pump put in, which turns it from kind of an overnight decision into something that could take up to 3 months to have installed. So clearly, people are not going to wait 3 months to have a new heat source into their homes. So it's something that we need to try and think about how we can address that. So I'll just run through some of the key points in this presentation. I've got to be honest, this is something that Octopus presented to me a month or so back. It's not my presentation, but I will do my best to pick up on the key points with you. So just kind of run through the kind of issues around planning, which is, we think, probably the biggest issue around adoption. The fact that planning rules make it harder to buy a heat pump. There are restrictions on noise, proximity to boundaries, and the size of heat pumps, which are just very restrictive. They're not uniformly applied by councils. Leeds is good, but there's a number of councils that are more stringent. And interestingly, air conditioning units don't have any noise restrictions or similar restrictions. And air source heat pumps are basically air conditioning units running backwards. Planning just asks people to be considerate if they're putting air conditioning units in, whereas there are very stringent rules on air source heat pumps. So I'm going to run through these three issues: the noise limits, the boundary limits, and the size limits, and then have a discussion with all of you about some options that we could pick up going forwards. So two examples of heating systems that would work in more rural areas. One is an external oil boiler. It's dirty, it's large, it's noisy, and doesn't have any planning requirements. The other is an air source heat pump, which is smaller, uses less energy, produces fewer emissions, both CO2 and carcinogens, and is smaller and does have planning permissions requirements. So we think that is fundamentally flawed in terms of policy intent. So in detail, the Town and Country Planning Act defines the noise standards for heat pumps, and it's basically measured at the nearest neighbour's window and can't be more than 42 decibels at the nearest neighbour's window. The analysis that Octopus did in terms of their customers, they had a survey of 808 heat pump installs. Of those 808, 27% required permission, and the vast majority of those, 22.5%, had issues with noise levels, where they then had to seek full planning permission for the install. In addition, there were 35% more customers who just didn't even proceed with the idea of having a heat pump installed, purely because they thought there might be issues with planning. So there's a huge dropout rate right at the very beginning. Interestingly, of all those that had to seek planning permission, over 90% were eventually granted planning permission, which suggests that it's just bureaucracy. The vast majority of them are fine, but they just have to go through the hurdles. And this is 8 weeks plus of time, and ties up some of our officer time in terms of dealing with these planning requests. So yeah, I'm going to skip over this one. So the solutions that are being proposed are to increase the boundary, the noise threshold of 47 decibels from 42. And then the two which I think are kind of least controversial are to remove rules around the heat pumps being within 1 metre property boundary, and remove the size limits on heat pumps. And I'll just illustrate those a little bit more. So noise, this graph here just shows where heat pumps fall in the categorization of noise. So 42 decibels is below that of a refrigerator hum, which is around 50. So between birdsong and a refrigerator hum is the noise that is the current noise limit for heat pumps. So if there was a small change in decibel limits, pushing it up to 47 decibels, it would mean that just 10% of homes would need planning permission, rather than the whatever it was 22.5% related to noise as it is at the moment. So that seems to have disappeared slightly off my screen. And this just illustrates some of the issues with the noise and heat pumps. That at 47 decibels, it's about 5.1 meters. At 42 decibels is about 9.6 meters to a neighbour's window, which drives some really peculiar location issues in terms of where heat pumps are then located. Which then leads us on to boundaries. At the moment, you can't put a heat pump within 1 metre of a boundary without seeking planning permission, even if it's completely hidden by a shed or a fence line. So you can have something which is completely unobtrusive, but you're just simply not allowed to have it there. And that drives, again, some peculiar behaviour where if you had a longer garden, you could site your heat pump partway down the garden on the boundary line, disturbing nobody, but you're just simply not allowed to do that unless you seek planning permission for it. And then the final issue is around size. So as with a lot of technology, you're fighting to do a whole range of different things. You're trying to improve the efficiency of energy conversion, you're trying to constrain sound levels, and for an arbitrary reason, you're also trying to constrain size. Whereas if heat pumps are allowed to be bigger, they can run with larger fans that operate more slowly and therefore drop the noise that's coming out from the system and improve their efficiency. So this artificial constraint in size means that we're actually not able to develop the technologies we need that would address some of the other issues. So this just shows at the moment in terraced areas, we're not constrained by size. In more rural areas where you need larger heat pumps, then actually it does become an issue, even though there might be lots of space around and no impact on neighbours. But there is a change in the design of heat pumps. So from, I think, 2025, there's been industry-wide switch away from the more polluting refrigerant to a greener refrigerant, which just operates in a different way. So there's an industry-wide push for larger heat pumps to allow this new refrigerant to work better, which is going to cause issues even for some of those smaller properties. So almost there. So that is kind of an outline of the issues that we're facing. At the moment, we're not getting lots of applications coming through for heat pump, partly because of those barriers, partly because it's still a new technology. But we think there will be a significant increase in people wanting to do air source heat pumps over the next few years. So we've got two options. One, just to wait for national legislative changes, or the second, to try to address this, possibly by introducing a local development order, which could cover one or more of these barriers, just to try and improve the situation within Leeds. It's worth stressing that a local development order is not an easy undertaking. It takes around 9 months to go through the consultation process once you develop the detail of the order, and we are struggling with resourcing and planning at the moment. But I think it is just something that is worth considering, and considering whether that's something we want to do or whether we should really be lobbying for national policy changes. So my final slide, promise you, is just one where I'm just really welcome some discussions about anything that you heard just now, and specifically focusing on these sort of 5 or 6 questions here. Is this something that we think is an issue? And if so, what is our appetite to do something about it?
Thank you very much, George. Absolutely fascinating. Do people think we should address these question by question? I can't see you all.
I can see Councillor Hannan has his hand up.
I can see that, and I will bring you in first, Councillor Hannan, but I have 2 options. I can either open it up to a general conversation, or we can discuss it line by line. So does anybody have a preference? No.
Can we open up, Councillor Derrick?
Sorry?
Can we open the discussion up?
Can we what? Leave the discussion up, points?
Can we open the discussion up? Sorry.
Yes. That's just what I was going to do, but I was just wondering whether people wanted to do it line by line on the slide, or whether you wanted to have a general discussion. But in the absence of any strong opinions, Can we, George, just leave this slide up so that people can see the questions that you'd like us to discuss? But I'll open it up for comments in general, but preferably that deal with these questions that George has asked us to look at. Okay, and Councillor Hannan, you're first. Thank you.
Sounds like a wonderful initiative, and the city would benefit from it. I've just got one question. I'm not too familiar with how these systems work, but one thing I would like to know is, how does it perform in poor weather when it's there's ground frost and the snow? How would it source the heat from that into homes? And has it been proven and tested? Thank you.
So,
George, do you want to come in?
Yeah, so I'm not a technical expert, but I can get some way to answer your question. So effectively, they are very similar to an air conditioning unit, but running in reverse. So they take ambient heat in the environment and then upgrade it via a refrigerant system to produce useful heat in your home. So typically they run at a much lower temperature than the gas boilers. So you need slightly bigger radiators. And they do run best when it's above freezing. You get more energy out of that kind of ambient energy. So basically, you put electricity through them, and then it upgrades the heat. As the temperature drops away, then they do have to work harder to get that ambient heat and put it into the home. But they do still operate even when it's sub-zero. But it just is more expensive for those times. And they are tried and tested. They've been in operation for a good number of years now. The key thing is having quite a well insulated home so that they don't have to work really hard to get that energy that you need to keep the home warm.
Thank you very much, George. Just one final bit I forgot to add. So if this is replacing a gas central heating, are we expecting like for like, or is there a slight difference in how heat generates quickly, or does it take longer? And these are the questions we might get from people that might want to think about installing these.
Yeah, again, it's a really good question. If you're moving away from a gas boiler, then it's a different sort of heating system. So they operate at a lower temperature. So generally what you would do if you had a new build is you'd put underfloor heating in. So you have them running at a low level all the time, putting heat into the fabric of the building. Where there's a radiator system, it's a similar principle. They operate at a low level almost all the time. You kind of set them just to run at a very low level, keeping the home warm, rather than with a gas boiler. You can turn it on and it almost instantly it starts kicking out very hot heat from the radiators. So there's an education piece with people to make sure they operate them correctly. But where we've put in ground source heat pumps with tenants who used to have storage heaters, they've really welcomed having the new heat pumps in. They much prefer the sort of heat and the controllability rather than the storage heaters.
Thank you, George. Councillor Hannan, any more questions? Okay, so next on my list is Councillor Anderson.
Right. I don't want to be a problem here, but the National Energy Action ran a course, an exam actually recently, which I took part in, and they've raised significant concerns about this method of heating. For example, they would recommend that ground source heat pumps, which draw their heat from the ground, are more efficient than air source heat pumps, because as has just been said, when the temperature drops, and we do have a problem with temperatures in some parts of the city, this can lead to higher costs over the winter period, and also the size of the heat pump that people are being sold by some of these companies, because an oversized heat pump can cost you more. you don't necessarily get an increase on it. And undersizing means that you could really, because if you've set yourself a budget and try to replace it like for like, it can sometimes come out. For example, a heat pump works hard to get a room up to temperature. It draws a lot of power, initially warm to a warm room, but then draws less to maintain it. And so people don't like having their heating on all the time because they feel that they're wasting energy because we've got other people. So what George was saying is we need to probably make sure that people are insulated their properties, first of all, because people tend to come in, turn the heating up when they come in from work, and that means the system's inefficient and actually does cost them more in which to do. And the other thing from an aesthetic point of view, there's a whole raft of other ones, but I'm not going to go into them all, is that there are a lot of people who use them don't like them because they don't have anything with a glow on it. There is a psychological issue that they were coming up with. And so to answer that, what they're doing is manufacturers are now coming up with a glow effect thing. It's just psychological for people. They turn their heat up because they don't see a glow, so they turn it up, and it is proving inefficient. The exam that I've had to sit recently was the tutorial was all about. There was a whole raft of other things as well. But before we answer those questions, I think we've got to be sure. And I was talking about the Holt deals, because obviously I'm 100% in favour of what was happening. And they've said to me, you need to make sure that every year you remind your tenants how to operate your system effectively. Otherwise, if they try and go back to old ways of doing things, it will cost them more in the long term. And housing haven't got a process in place for addressing that.
Yeah, some very interesting and kind of well observed points there. I think the education piece is absolutely fundamental. It is a different way of doing things, but we're seeing people moving from petrol, diesel cars to electric cars, and that's again, it's a lifestyle choice. It's a change of the way that you do things, but it's not impossible to do. This is again something where if people are engaged and understand how to do it, then you can change the way people use their heating system. But you're right, you do need to give them the information and tools to do it. The bigger issue is around the design and the specification. So certainly the home needs to be well insulated first, and then secondly the system needs to be designed to operate effectively for that particular home. And Councillor Dye's comments earlier about a lack of skills is probably one of the areas that we do need to focus on. So there are people who can design these in the right way so that you don't then have horror stories of things not working correctly.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on any of that?
I just think we need to have a proper debate before we start addressing some of those issues, because it may be that people need larger, because if they live in cold areas of the city, they may need larger ones, and that then you set a limit, which planning can then agree with, but you then might find that some people need to get larger ones, and they then start needing it. And it isn't necessarily in the, shall we say, the more expensive areas that you need the bigger ones. Sometimes it can be in the areas where people themselves can't afford them. So all I would do is put a question mark over getting this clarity. Octopus do have some skin in this game, and if we moved in that direction, they will do particularly well out of this. So we need to be sure we're giving people proper advice, because we will be blamed if we get this wrong. But I'm happy to leave it at that.
Thank you for your points. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. I think we probably need a both lobbying for legislative change, but also to look at possible local approaches. And I would suggest possibly, if possible, especially when it comes to accessing funding for exploring it, looking at it at a West Yorkshire level, which would seem to make sense if there were agreements at a from a wider perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to comment on that, George?
Agree.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Foster.
Yeah. Something that somebody just mentioned there, I think it was the electric car analogy, and I'm just wondering that there might just be a bit of a danger where we rush in to a scheme that gets heat pumps fitted into Leeds quicker than maybe some of the other towns and cities. But are we sort of still on first generation heat pumps, and are we going to find that we're going to saddle the people of Leeds with an inferior product, and that, I don't know, 7 or 8 years' time, heat pumps are considerably more efficient and more effective? So I sort of come from an industry that would always be very wary of venturing into new technologies. They always want to use tried and tested. And I just wonder if this is an example. Why do we want to rush in? I can understand possibly preparing the ground, but I'm not convinced at the moment that the technology is as good as it can get.
Yeah, it's a good point. Avoiding having kind of dud technology. We're no longer in the first generation of heat pumps. There have been heat pumps around for decades now, and these are now being used right across Europe. So the major manufacturers are large. They've got a lot of experience. It's a lot of people who've manufactured boilers for decades and decades are now moving into heat pumps. So you can get, Weissmann and Bosch and all the kind of big name boiler manufacturers have got good quality heat pumps with appropriate guarantees and warranties sat behind them. So I don't think that's particularly an issue. I think it's not really a case of kind of rushing in. There's a national move afoot here to change and increase the number of heat pumps that are being deployed, both ground source and air source. And I think it's that kind of first mover advantage that if we create the right environment for installing heat pumps in Leeds, and remember, we're not saying this will force people to install heat pumps, it just makes it easier to put them in if you want to. It will actually create more of an incentive for companies to locate their training within Leeds to get more contractors who are able to do this work. So I think we'll end up in a much stronger position than if we just kind of follow the herd.
Thank you, George. Polly, did you want to come in on that question?
Yeah, George has said some of the things I was going to say. So I think it's really, really important to understand the UK is in a different position to the rest of Europe. Heat pumps have been around for decades, and Finland, Norway, Sweden and Estonia, which are some of the coldest countries, are the ones using heat pumps. So I think for us it feels like a new technology, but it's not, and I think that's really, really key in this discussion. And I think everything, I'll just echo really what George has said in terms of the opportunity for Leeds to actually be on the front foot. And although Octopus have brought this issue to us, it's an industry-wide issue, and it will be an absolute barrier to somebody who actually actively wants to change their gas boiler to a heat pump, but actually the gas boiler breaks and it takes too long to get planning. So then you have no choice. So even when people have done their own research and know what they want, it is acting as a barrier. So I think, we can come back and answer the various questions about heat pumps and, do the trials and evidence. But I think that point about us being a city that removes barriers has got to kind of be part of the focus of this.
Thank you. Thank you, Polly, for those comments. Councillor Foster, did you have anything further you wanted to add?
Not really, but I would just sort of comment and say, I don't see there anything wrong in being part of the herd sometimes. There's an advantage to it sometimes.
Okay, thank you. So next hand I have is Councillor Carlill.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I'm reflecting back to some of the thoughts we've had on other issues many times around heat pumps and other things. I mean, one of the issues that we found is that there may not be enough trained installers for the work that we want to do as a council and where we've been putting them in places. And that's something that I think we've been really keen not to miss out on as a city which has quite a heart of manufacturing and has quite a lot of manufacturing in. I think it would be good were we to be the lead area for manufacturing of heat pumps, and quite a lot of the problems we see around when we've been looking at changes in planning policy have been a lot of concern from developers or house builders around the fact that there just isn't the industry behind a lot of the products we'd want them to see in order to move to more renewables. And in many cases, it seems people have been sticking with boilers, not I think because they've been necessarily the most reassuring thing, and that they're seen as an old technology, but just that there needs to be more of an advancement and normalization of some of the other types of technology. And I think that's what this may give us the option for. And I think there are a lot of barriers between these schemes, which is why we wanted to set up things like the hub we talked about earlier. And it just looks to me here like we'd be able to remove one of those barriers in the city, which to me looks like a positive. There are a lot of barriers there already. We are just removing some of the planning difficulties. I guess a question on it is what way did we respond to solar panels at first through planning? Obviously they must have, when they came in, obviously they're not a large box or addition, but they do have a visual impact, obviously. Do we know whether there was anything we did around that point to make it easier in planning policy and how it's moved on? I think this is probably only the way we're going. And I've looked into it myself for my own house, and there are just too many unknowns probably that I would look at. If this takes one of them away, then absolutely.
Yes, it's a good question about the solar panels. So it's going back a way now, but I think there was an issue where they were not permitted development generally. So when we were creating some of the area action plans, we created those area action plans that made solar panels permitted development apart from particular kind of homes like listed buildings or in conservation areas. But it was a similar sort of thing where planning was a barrier, so we decided to use our planning policies as a way to address that. We'd probably be able to do something similar if we were setting up any more area action plans for heat pumps, but because they only deal with a bit of the city, it's not as powerful as a local development order, which we can then apply to the whole of the city if we wanted to.
Sorry, I was speaking then, but the only people who can hear me are Councillor Thompson and Councillor McCluskey. I was asking if you wanted to come back on any of that, Councillor Carlisle.
No, I'll let other people come in. I might come back and comment later.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bowden.
Hi, yeah, I'd just like to thank George for his presentation. It was really comprehensive, and also I think Polly also just recently highlighted something, which was obviously there was real concerns if I think it wasn't it 30% of people look into having a heat pump and then not going through it, and there's the concerns that actually it's the planning issues that are preventing that. So yeah, I think there's a real benefit for us to actually do take a lead on this and do a development order. And yeah, the idea that there's they might not be efficient now. I mean, there's always going to be more efficiencies as technologies develop, but I think as it stands now, whilst there's a high cost of installation, I think they're like 3 times the heat pumps require 3 times less energy than a boiler does. So even as current models stand now, they are incredibly efficient, and I think there's many people in Leeds who would like to get them installed. And I think if there's anything that we can can do to see that happen, that's definitely a great thing. And I think Peter Carlisle made a really good point. I mean, if we can lead on this, this gives actual opportunities for manufacturing and installation and businesses actually. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carlisle.
Got there at last. Yeah, so thanks again to those all those who've doing this work and did the presentation. I think this is really, I think others have already touched on this, but I do just want to echo it again that, like, you know, I am 100% all for kind of pioneering new stuff. I want Leeds to be leading this stuff. And personality wise, I'm somebody who would prefer to take risks and kind of forge ahead. But at the same time, I'm aware of very tangible situations in the city where large and small, where pioneering new technology, or technology that's even new to this country, even if it's established in other countries, has been employed, and where there's just been there's been issues possibly in the installation, and so in some cases years and years later we have situations, and some of you might know what situations I'm referring to, where there is a piece of technology that is broken, has been broken for many years, and is causing issues, or is just redundant and useless, and there's a legal battle because nobody's, you know, the manufacturers are saying it's fine when we sent it across to you. The installers are saying we did what we were told, and the kind of the owners of the properties and developments are saying, well, like, somebody needs to do something, and you're stuck with stasis. And more recently, there's green developments that have happened in the city where again there's been a real breakdown around the installation of new technologies, possibly because they're just not well understood. And again, I'm talking about technologies that I think are established elsewhere in the world, but just not in Leeds and not in the UK. And there's issues and upsets. So I'm all for new stuff, but we just need to be really careful. We don't just wade in and create a lot of upset and broken technology and wasted money. There you go. Wish I could be more uplifting. But
thank you very much. George, did you want to come back on any of the points that we've just covered?
I think interesting views, quite I suppose both sides of the coin, and I think the bit for me that is, I suppose, important to remember, that the LDO wouldn't force anyone to do anything. It is designed to be an enabling piece of work, just to make it easier for those who want to do something. The other bit just worth raising is I had a conversation with an organisation called Nesta today. They used to be kind of a government-sponsored innovation service and spun out about 10 years ago to form a private innovation service. And they're focusing very much on sustainable lives and technologies, sustainable living at the moment. And just so happens that they have been doing some thinking around heat pumps at a national level, looking at how do they unblock some of the issues that, you know, I highlighted earlier. So they came to a very similar set of conclusions. That the thing that they concluded would be the single biggest way to address some of the barriers that we're seeing through planning at the moment is just to change the size and the location of heat pumps, because the size is constrained. It just means that you have to go with some models which just create more noise than if you were to kind of slightly relax that and allow slightly larger models to go in where they can use just different technologies. So I think if we're thinking about what we could do as a city, then it might be something that is pretty low impact in terms of people's impact on people, but would be a large impact in terms of allowing different technologies, newer technologies, to come in and do good for people.
Thank you, George. Oh, Polly.
Probably just worth as well saying, you know, as a city, we've made a commitment of moving towards net zero as quickly as possible by 2030, and actually heat within housing is a key barrier. you know, electricity, we will get the decarbonisation at a grid level, but actually there does need to be a kind of step up in speed and action. So if we're committed to 2030, I think we do have to act as an enabler as a city. So I think it's just worth bearing that in mind, because if we don't start to change things, then actually we are locking in heat, and we're seeing what's happening around the world at the minute. So I don't think anybody probably wants that.
Thank you, Polly. Councillor Carlill.
Thanks. I guess my second bit I was going to come on to was more from the planning side of it rather than technology, because there's one side which is the technology around the heat pumps, the other's the planning side, and I was just trying to compare it to similar permitted developments, because the aspect of size is a bit of an odd one, because there are some extensions I think that you'd be allowed on ground floor level as complete permitted development. So it looks like I could build a room on the back of my house or a conservatory or similar, but couldn't build a heat pump the same size. So I think it's worth reflecting on those things. I think in terms of the noise, that's interesting. It does really depend, as George says. I've got some residents of mine who live opposite an industrial meal complex, and they've got some air conditioning units on the back, and in a residential house, having 6 air conditioning units opposite you makes quite a lot of noise if there's no noise there in the rest of the evening in a quiet village the rest of the time. However, if this is in a industrial estate and they're replacing their gas boilers with heat pumps, I don't think it'd make much difference. So I think it's worth reflecting on how it equates and whether they're being treated fairly in planning compared to maybe other things, and that would be a useful thing to follow up, I think. That might be one that's more suitable to follow up through joint plans panel or development plans panel or similar, to think of those impacts. Is there anything else with the same impacts that is treated differently at the moment, just because specific planning policy hasn't come around for that? And I think that would be a real angle we want to look at, because whether or not, you know, somebody builds an extension is up to them. Whether somebody buys a heat pump is up to them. But is planning policy negatively impacting one rather than the other? Maybe I think is a useful point.
Thank you, Councillor McCluskey.
Just find it unusual. You need planning permission for a heat pump, but not for a wood fire, a wood burner fire.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that point. I think we've touched on more than one strange planning anomaly at the moment. Okay, before I make some comments of my own, does anybody want to specifically comment on any of the questions that George has put in front of us? Okay, so shall I make some comments on them then? In terms of the first one, do we agree that this is an issue in Leeds? My personal thought, George, is that the points that you made in your presentation clearly outlined that it is. You know, the slides that you shared that originated from Octopus, I think the evidence on those was fairly clear. Is there an appetite? I would certainly support it. I think in the discussion we've talked about kind of pros and cons, but I think the overriding point for me is that we are in a climate emergency and we have net zero commitments to reach. And it seems to me that this is one way that would help towards that. I agree with the points people have made that we're not enforcing any type of technology on people. We're just enabling people who want it to do it more easily and in a quicker time frame. I think it would make sense that the issues that it covered were the 3 key ones that you outlined to us, George, in terms of distance from boundary, size, and decibels, particularly noting where it sits in between 2 was it fridges and birds or something like that. It didn't seem to me that it was a particularly challenging noise issue. I would suggest that if we were to go for it, it would make sense for it to cover the whole city. Why would it not? I don't see the benefit of it covering just particular areas. Councillor Carlisle's comments are interesting about the level of noise is different in different parts of the city. I'm not quite sure whether that means we should have variable noise standards, but I do note that point, that those of us who live in built up areas with lots of traffic would probably not notice it if it was even higher than where it sat on the chart. But you probably would if you're in a very rural place. But I don't know, I would be inclined to say that isn't a reason to have variable noise standards, that we should stick with a standard that is acceptable to people in quieter areas and apply that across the city. And then the tricky one, how do we pay for it? I mean, we all know that we're in a situation where we don't have, I was going to say money to burn. That's probably not a very good analogy, is it, when we're talking about heat pumps? But I do think it's worth investing, whether any of the partners we've talked about today, for example, Octopus will be, happy to come in on an event, an investment of some kind. I don't know. I think for me, that's the most difficult question on the slide. But I would certainly recommend as chair that we most definitely should look at an LDO, and I would be more than happy to recommend that. So I don't know if anybody else has got any comments.
If no one else is jumping in, I can't see your hands. Just think about that final point. I think it's a point that Councillor Thompson made about West Yorkshire. It's possibly something that we could explore with West Yorkshire Combined Authority, whether they've got some resource to support some of the establishment costs, because there's a certain amount of legal advice that needs to be put into getting the wording right and making sure that the evidence base lined up. And then the point about Octopus, it's certainly something that we could explore with them. We need to check legally that we're not doing anything wrong, but I don't think it would be. We wouldn't be setting up something where Octopus benefits from this and no other contractor does. It would be for the whole market, but potentially sponsored by Octopus, who have a stake in Leeds already. But I think that's really helpful. Adam Harvett hoped to be here today, but he had conflicting meetings. So I'll reflect your comments back to him, and we'll just see if we can take this forward.
Thank you very much, George. Absolutely fascinating discussion all around, I think. Thank you for coming. Thank you for taking time.
No problem at all.
Hopefully you can carry our recommendation on forwards. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll try and unshare now.
Yes,
Stop sharing.
But I think it was useful to have it up there. So thank you very much.
Great, no problem.
Okay, thank you. So that brings us to our final item. And our final item is on tree planting initiatives. So Tony, thank you for your patience.
It's okay, Councillor.
It's over to you.
Good afternoon all. I'll just share screen. And I'll do so in the same way that George just did, if that works for everybody. Should hopefully be coming through soon. Can everybody see that?
Yes, it's up.
Thank you.
Excellent. Just pop you guys over there. Okay, and I'll just. Okay, so Yeah, thank you for everybody's time. Just going to talk you through the Woodland Creation Initiative. Just start off with some introduction. So this is principally delivered by my team. I'm head of ops within the Climate, Energy and Green Spaces team. It's led by Vicky Marsden, strongly supported by Glenn Gordon, who provides technical support. It's highly likely that members will have been contacted by probably James O'Connor, Ryan Fowler, or Emily Kinnaird. It really is a whole team approach. A lot of the work is undertaken in-house in terms of what's delivered on site, and obviously the trees are grown in the nursery. So I thought it would just be helpful to give a sense of just how many people are involved in this across the parts. Well, the Climate, Energy and Green Space Service, and certainly Green Space is part of that, because it very much is a team effort. So what is the scheme? Well, it's principally a response to the declaration of a climate emergency in 2019. Members will be aware that funding and commitment was made at the beginning of 2020, with subsequent additions to that made at full council in February of that year. It is about planting 5.8 million trees over 25 years. It's focusing, I think, most primarily on that 50 hectares of canopy cover. I've touched already on us growing our own trees in-house at the council's horticultural glasshouse, the area. We've had to modify what we do in order to deliver on that, and we're now in a position where we are fully able to deliver all of those trees that we need in-house, as well as providing for others. I think a salient element as well of the scheme is very much about the public engagement and volunteering that we're undertaking. It's central to the initiative, everything from our seed growing to planting on site, how we can engage schools. It's all a key part of what we're looking to do and deliver. Perhaps some focus on that strategic context. Members will be aware of the commitments that was made corporately around White Rose Forest. Again, this was something that went to Executive Board in 2020, towards the end of the year. We've made significant commitments within that, and that's part of our strategic partnership, looking at how we create woodland canopy right across the city region. I've included below that little quote there, where we're looking to create a sustainable, well-wooded landscape for the benefit of people, the economy, wildlife, Leeds and the city region. Always worthwhile, I feel, just to reflect on some of those benefits of trees, which I think are well known to this group, certainly. Notwithstanding that, clearly play a key role in terms of climate change adaptation, and can be part of that contribution to how we get to and achieve net zero, which obviously links into what you've been talking about already. Just some information there, just to give a sense of scale. So we're looking at 1 ton of CO2 is equal to 500 meter cubed hot air balloon. You know some of that. And again, how woodland creation, woodland establishment in the city can help and support. It has been, apologies, I moved past that slide too quickly. We're now in year 4. What's provided on this slide is just some information as to the process that we look to go through. Scheme identification is quite lengthy. What we often find is that we need at least double, if not more than that, of sites. And once we've gone through the technical process and selected sites and considered whether planting is or isn't feasible, we then get to a certain number of planting sites per year. Thus far, we've planted 74 sites in year 1, 82 sites in year 2, and then year 3 we planted 73. That roughly equates to circa 300,000 whips, nearly 1,000 standard trees. And then as we move forward into year 4, which is where we are presently, we've looked and considered 119 sites. 38 of those are suitable. We're working on others, and members will be aware that we're presently out to consultation through Commonplace on a number of those. That just gives you a sense of what we're looking at and consulting on at the minute. So out of those sites and schemes that we're looking to consider, 27 are whip planting site, and that will equate to, in this year, circa 14 hectares of planting. And then we're looking at a further 54 standard tree planting sites. We're significantly increasing the volume of standard tree planting that we're looking to undertake from what we did in years 1 and 2. And quite a number will be planned, hopefully, in this year. We're also undertaking quite an extensive review of the beat up work that's needed. If this really is a cyclical process, it's not a case of plant and moving on. We're constantly going back to sites that we've done in years 1, 2 and 3. And we're looking to go back and boost those using that term beating up, where we'll just go back and we'll look to replant where we've got losses. Probably worthwhile just dwelling on that a little bit, because I'm sure it's something that members will be aware of. We have undertaken a review of all 106 sites. We are developing a schedule of works where we can look at what's needed to remedy areas where failure has been apparent. Failure can have occurred for a number of reasons. We've touched on some of those in the examples on screen, whether that be trampling, whether that be just be vandalism. Clearly as well, there's been issues in some instances with heat waves and weather change. And also I think as well, just this year in particular, grassland management has been a real issue for us. There's been some examples where the grassland has probably taken over the whips to some extent. That's something that we're looking at also, and how we can remedy processes. But it's almost acknowledging there has been some challenges with some sites. Some of those sites would have been absolutely fine when they were beaten up last year. It's coming back to them this year and just reassuring members that once we've planted, we were regularly revisiting sites and seeking to address any issues as we find and continually ensure that the woodlands that we're seeking to establish do in fact establish. Touched already on commonplace, which members who have woodland tree planting sites will be familiar with. It's something that we have rolled out extensively through 2022 and 2023. It is an interactive process. It does provide an opportunity for resident comments. We've looked to complement this with letter drops. We'll have some presence on site when we can. We'll provide opportunities for people to access commonplace through the leaflets and the posters that we put up on site. So really are looking to do all we can to provide the residents with as many opportunities to comment as we possibly can. What we're also looking to do extensively is ensure that we can develop skills. I've talked already about how we are growing our own in the nursery. That's allowing our nursery staff to become more accustomed and developed in growing trees from seed, which is really excellent. But then it also extends to our officer corps. We're regularly recruiting into that team, looking at ensuring they're multi-skilled and multidisciplined, can look at technical details around soil. We're able to complete extensive environmental impact assessments, which are a requirement of Forestry Commission, and certainly for approvals and in some instances for us to get woodland creation grant funding. And equally our operational teams, we're increasingly proficient at site preparation, looking at what's needed in terms of fencing, and how we can look in terms of the treatments that we do to ensure these sites become established. In terms of the area, we're now also looking at how that can further help with the hardiness of our tree stock, how we can move to some trees being hardened off outside, how we can look to develop into a position where we can actually grow some of our whip planting onto more standard sizes. So we're really looking at being able to position to again emphasize that ability to be self-sufficient. I would also emphasize with the area, we've got some really good and strong partnerships with neighbouring authorities in the White Rose Forest generally, where we're looking to grow seed on their behalf, almost on a commercial basis. So it is something that, again, re-emphasising what I said at the beginning of the presentation, it's a whole team effort, but it's all looking at how we upskill and change that skill dynamic across the park service to reflect the fact that this is going to be a long-term work programme for us. It's also relevant to just note and touch on the fact there's been the recent launch of the Trees for Streets initiative. Some press went out about this quite recently. It is a collaboration between Trees for Streets, which is a charity, the council, residents. It is about the people of Leeds and knowing their own streets and looking where where trees can be planted close to in residential areas. And to this point, I thought members might be interested to know that there's been 49 expressions of interest post-launch. So hopefully that picks up and gathers some momentum. And it's great to see that we're able to look at giving residents the opportunity to come up with sites and proposals themselves. A significant success has really been our ability to engage schools in seed collection. It was something that gained quite a lot of traction in media last year. It's something that we will again be looking to roll out in 2023. Some real significant benefits in terms of volunteering numbers and participation through young people, which again, I think is a key part of spreading the narrative around the benefits of trees generally and how they can contribute towards more broader issues around climate change. Similarly, of course, with tree planting, I've touched on this already. A key part of what we're looking to do is how we engage with volunteers. We're now really lucky to have 800 volunteers registered in the terms of the woodland creation team. Our rangers team are regularly looking to engage with them. We'll have a full programme of volunteer planting opportunities that are ready to roll this winter. And hopefully we can work with friends groups, corporate groups, as well as other interested parties and those registered volunteers to ensure that there's the opportunity for all to participate in what we're looking to do. And equally, if that's not only supported through our Rangers team, but our operational teams in East and West will be on hand to support with some of that volunteer engagement when needed. So that's given you all hopefully an opportunity to get some sense of the woodland creation programme that we're looking to deliver and what its strategic context is. If you have any questions on that, I'd be more than happy to take them.
Fabulous, thank you very much, and some really, really interesting information for us all there. Anybody got any questions they would like to ask? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. I do have quite a few, I'm afraid. I came prepared for this one. So one unfortunate one in our ward is we've had some major issues with the consultation because ward members and the parish council weren't consulted on Rawdon Littlemore, which has village green status, which probably should have stopped it at the outset. It has led to some positive conversations about other potential sites in the ward, but it has been really difficult across the political spectrum to handle that and respond to it. So that may be something to follow up with separately to learn from it. I know Councillor Rafiq and others are aware there has been conversation with Vicky. We have some sites in our area where the survival rate of whips is very, very low, practically zero. Unfortunately, one where there'd been decarbonisation work at the leisure centre, which kind of took them all out. Others have been fenced in and have been more successful, but just still some concerns over that mode of working. Links with local events have been really positive. We've seen what Abbey Runners have done with their ECUP race, and actually the club, not conflicts of interest, declaration of interest. The club I'm part of that organises the Chevin Chase would like to do the same. So rather than using trees, not teas, to work with woodland creation to plant trees instead of giving people plastic T-shirts. And great that others have done that and led the way. And then finally, there seems certainly in our area to be a preference for small, carefully chosen sites rather than more extensive ones, and a concern, particularly for women's safety in parks, and how we perhaps link up the tree planting work with the work that's been done by the combined authority on safety for women and girls in parks and what makes them feel more confident. Sorry to list so many things all at once, but thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for those points and comments, Councillor Thompson. Do you want to come back on those, Tony?
Yeah, happy to, Councillor Dye, and Councillor Thompson, if I've missed any of them, please pick them up. I think it was important to acknowledge in the presentation that we have had some failures and that they've been in some instances quite extensive this year. I'd come back to my observation that this is something that we're A, aware of, and B, looking to develop some plans. It's something that we know we need to do. It is part of the process, and we anticipate that we will have some sites that fail. You touched around in the example where there's been some where there's been fenced in and they've been successful. I'm equally happy to acknowledge that there's some where the sites have been fenced in and they haven't, and others where the sites haven't been fenced in and they've been incredibly successful. So I think I'm more than happy to acknowledge that this is something that we need to continually learn from. And it's something that, again, I'd just reiterate that we are looking to put in plans in place where we can seek to address failures in previous years planting and learn lessons as we move forward. The question you raised around smaller, more carefully chosen sites, I'd acknowledge that my ideal scenario would be to plant hectares of land. I'm sometimes rather envious of colleagues in North Yorkshire who are able to plant 20 or 30 hectares and deliver these huge woodlands. It is part of the challenge of urban woodland creation, where we're looking at areas of land that is quite tight and limited. I would reassure members that we are working collaboratively across council, working extensively with Mark Mills's team in asset management. I know Mark is looking at the council's agricultural portfolio, so I'm hopeful, councillor, there will be some larger sites that come forward soon. With regards to the violence against women and girls agenda and women's safety generally in parks and green spaces, because of the nature of what I do, I'm lucky that I get to span quite a lot of initiatives, and some of the work that the team have done in Holbeck Moor, Woodhouse, equally around some of the work we've done linked to the Morley bid. We recognise that sight lines, feeling claustrophobic, irrespective agenda, can create a sense of feeling unsafe in parks and green spaces. We're aware of that, factoring that into some of our woodland creation initiatives. What I really hope as we move forward is what we've got the commitments for in terms of our parks and green space strategies for our community parks, to have a plan and a page that we can look at sites holistically. We certainly won't look to build in problems as we move forward in the future. There's a lot of collaboration between teams that are working on those agendas, so it's certainly something that I hope we can mitigate against. I'm sure there will be some examples where we may need to rethink in the future, but it is something that we're aware of, and it's equally something that we want to ensure we don't create ourselves problems. But I would again reassure members that we are acutely aware of how woodland canopy can increase that sense of vulnerability when using parks and green spaces. So it's helpful that you've raised that and hopefully reassured you that we are considering it. I think I picked them all up, but please let me know if I've forgotten any.
Consultation, Tony.
Thank you, Polly. You could have shouted that through the adjoining door there. Again, in terms of consultation, I wasn't aware of the issue with the village green. I will pick that up with the team. We, through consultation, try to make sure that that's a collaborative process. It's a conversation. If we get to a point through consultation where sites are identified as not being suitable, then we're more than happy to remove them from the process. I would seek some, I suppose, support from members on this group of recognising the value of woodland creation and the value of planting trees. So there is a need for us to note the executive board direction that we've gone down, and full council direction that we need to identify sites. So certainly some help in identifying sites and support with members around how we manage residents, and we get to a position where residents are comfortable and understand benefits would be helpful. But I'd fully acknowledge that in that instance that you shared, where we have identified a site and not picked up on the fact it's got a village green status, then that certainly is something that we'd look at and ensure that that's done as we move forward, so we don't get a repeat of that issue.
Thank you, Tony. Councillor Thompson, is there anything else you wanted to come back on, or anything that Tony missed?
No, I don't think so. Thank you. I'll follow up separately on the race planning issue, because that doesn't really relate here specifically. But just, yeah, really glad to learn that there's this constant desire to learn and improve processes. I think that's probably the most important thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your questions, and thank you, Tony, for your answers. Councillor Downs.
Yeah, thanks. The main issue I was going to raise was the one that Councillor Thompson raised, and that was in our ward. We've had virtually all the whips fail, certainly on 2 of the areas, if not all 3. Well over 90% fail. Now, I know that you're doing things to address that. I'm concerned that if we've had that problem and Councillor Thompson's had that problem, is this a citywide problem? Is it? I mean, woodland creation is great. It's something I really support, but how much effort are we putting in that we've got a learning process that we perhaps could have learned from before, and what is the failure rate across the city is point 1. On a more positive note, though, both Vicky and Emily have met regularly with myself and my ward colleagues. They came with some proposals for 1 or 2 sites which we felt were inappropriate, and they removed those. We suggested alternatives, which they then did pick up on and use. So the dialogue is working with us, and that's positive, and we want to continue to work with them to create the woodland. But my concern, just to reiterate Councillor Thompson's message, that it's a bit sad to see all the effort that's gone in and all the planting that's gone ahead, to see that it's effectively a wasted effort so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on any of those points, Tony?
Well, I certainly would like to thank Councillor Downs for his comments with regards to Vicky and Emily. I'll feed those back to the team, and it's reassuring to know that the technical team did engage in a dialogue with members in this instance, and hopefully that's replicated across the city. So I'll certainly feed that back in. I'm not yet in a position to put a figure on what the failure rate for whips are across the city. I would just reiterate there are examples where you can have really good establishment in one part of a plantation and not in another. I think the team as a whole recognised this challenge and recognised the fact that actually the effort needs to extend through to establishment. We're really committed to doing that. That commitment carries right across the operational team, our Rangers team, and the team that are looking to do the woodland creation sites and site identification. So I would just come back to my observation. I'm sure Polly would reiterate that there is a commitment just to ensure that these woodlands establish. In quite a lot of instances, we've got a grant that allows us to ensure that they do establish. So we will continually go back to these sites and get them to a point where they do. A lot of that, as I've touched on already, is possibly down to a variety of different reasons as to why they've failed. So quite articulating that is not always simple. I think I was quite flippant before when I referenced North Yorkshire, but it is that challenge quite often of us looking to establish these small woodland pockets in an urbanised area. We are looking to use most sites for standard tree planting, and perhaps where standard tree planting can supplement whip planting as well. But I think we're all well known that the principle of using whips to establish woodlands is industry best practice, but we'll continue to ensure that we go back to these sites and get to the point at which they do establish. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Do you want to come back on any of those points, Councillor Downs?
Yes, that's great. Thanks for that, Tony. It might be useful if you could give us an area of best practice where there has been a very successful whip planting, so we can see that, where that's happened. One thing I've just thought of while you were talking was, and I don't know whether it's a Leeds City Council scheme, but because it's not in my ward, but when I go down King Lane towards Alwoodley, I thought it was university land, but it may be Leeds City Council land. There's lots and lots of new trees that have recently been planted there to establish an area. I just wondered if that was anything to do with Leeds City Council or not, because that looked quite impressive, the amount that was going in. Barry's shaking his head, so it isn't ours, perhaps. But it just, as I say, I really would like to see it work. We've got a local group, Wildlife Friendly Otley, who have been meeting with us as well to try and establish more trees, and they're looking at putting more mature trees in. And I think one of the issues is you've got funding, you've got an objective to hit a certain target. Are you still going to be able to hit that target despite the failures so far? Because if you hit that target, that's ultimately where we need to be.
Thank you. Did you want to come back specifically on that question, Tony, about whether the target's in danger?
Yeah, I thank you, Councillor Dye. I've made a note of the King Lane question. If Councillor Anderson shook his head, then I'll clarify that for you, Councillor Downs, and who has done that work and what's proposed there. In terms of the commitment to meeting the target, then we know what we need to do over 25 years. We know that woodland can take 3 years at least to establish. So it's certainly something that we're committed to doing. And I don't see any reason at this point why we would say we aren't going to be able to meet it. I think a key consideration for us and a salient challenge, as I've touched on already, is identifying land where we can look to create woodland and canopy cover. So that's something that again needs to be part of our focus and energy, as well as ensuring that we get the process of establishment correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. And just before I bring Councillor Carlill in, Councillor Thompson has just posted in the chat, and I've just clicked on the link. Is that the King Lane site? And Councillor Anderson says thank you, which makes me think it must be. So if you're interested in finding out about that site, then click on the link in the chat. Okay, thank you, Councillor Carlill.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and thanks, Tony, for this. It's useful. I think it's useful for us to have some of this information around how it's gone, how obviously people have seen the whips, and in our area we've had the majority of them have been really successful. We've had a couple of problems. We've had one site that's failed this year, but I think that's for very specific based on the land there being incredibly boggy, and maybe that's something to learn about different types of site and what trees we plant there. We did have one or a few instances of vandalism, but there was a really nice one where one of the ones near to one of our primary schools, a lot of the whips were pulled out, and actually the head teacher got a series of the school kids to go back and replant them all over the next couple of days to make sure they were there, which was nice. I don't know whether it then needed yourself and colleagues to go back and see them, but that area seems to be doing really well. The one risk certainly in our area, as far as I see it, is becoming incredibly difficult for us to provide ideas of sites when you come back now. So obviously we've done 3 years worth of sites based on green space that we're aware of and that's in council ownership and control. I guess as we go through, that's going to become ever more increasingly difficult, and there are some obviously that haven't been there. I know there was a lot of work going on around, I guess, 2 areas that it'd be useful to get an update on. One is land within the council's control that isn't currently vested with parks and green spaces. So, you know, land that may be with housing, or land that may be assets that are currently rented out, you know, for we've got a lot of fields that are used for grazing, for instance, around near us, some of which are rented out by the council, and whether any more of those are being able to be used in future. And then just anything around private land. I know we did have a call out for people, if they did have large amounts of private land, that they would be willing to gift us, and we'd obviously cover the planting we could use. I just wondered if there was an update on those areas, really. So where there was land that wasn't taking away our established public green space, should we say?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I mean, I have to confess, as I've been reflecting back and I've been chatting through some of the answers, I've got some handwritten notes here that gives us some indication of what tree planting is taking place outside of our programme, which were handily provided by the colleagues. So I can relay some of that information. So within the White Rose Forest area, there's been circa 36 hectares of planting on non-council owned land. And that 34 hectares of that has received funding through the White Rose Forest. So there is activity taken on private landowners. I've already touched that that my colleagues and teams and Polly at a very strategic level are working with colleagues in asset management. I'm sure that they would be helpfully provide us with some information that could be shared to this group. It is the challenge that they've got of considering need for agricultural value, agricultural tendencies versus things and considerations such as solar farms and other things that are being considered in the round. Notwithstanding that, they're aware of the challenge, they're aware they need to be part of the solution. And I think that will come from those areas of landholding outside of the council's 4,000 hectares, which is normally considered as being part of parks and green spaces. I do think there's a need for us to continue to look, and I think a lot of that can be within an almost marginal gains approach, where we think about how we can extend hedgerows, or we think about how we can extend woodland planting areas and margins. And I'm determined that we go and do that, and we continue to strive to look at all the sites that we possibly can. I do feel that the opportunities for us to add hectares at scale will come through that piece of strategic work that's taking place with colleagues in asset management now. And a micro example of that, but actually is quite a large scale, is the Orbital Road excludes extensive amounts of tree planting, and it's just a case of being joined up on some of those initiatives and seeking opportunities. Had we been successful with some of the levelling up funding that we were looking to seek central government approval for, that the authority developed, then that would have included extensive woodland creation also. So I think it's just reassuring members that we are thinking about woodland creation holistically, as well as looking at major infrastructure development. So I'll continue to press on that point, but please be reassured that we are working with colleagues across city development to identify land at scale. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to come back on that, Councillor Carlill? No. Okay, anybody else got any questions or comments that they'd like to make? Okay, so just briefly to add my own then, I also want to say that in my ward we've had very positive dialogue with Vicky and team, and we've had on-site meetings where we've all looked at sites and looked at progress. So just want to pass on my own thanks for that. In terms of groups, when we had the discussion of volunteers, have you got the Climate Action Leeds hubs on your list of volunteers? Because we've certainly got a very active hub in Killingbeck and Seacroft, who, if they're on your radar, great, but if they're not, then they might be a source of volunteers. And then the final one from me was just being aware of the 50 hectare target, and is there anything that we can do as members of this committee to help bring forward sites that you might find useful?
Thank you, Chair. So I mean, again, really encouraging that I can share this positive feedback with the team. So I will certainly ensure that that gets back, and I'm grateful for receiving that. I will clarify with colleagues as to whether or not those active hubs that you referred to, we are talking to them. I'd be disappointed if we aren't, but again, more than happy to talk to others and ensure that those with an interest in the agenda are actively engaged in woodland creation where they possibly can be. I will clarify that with the team. I made the point already, Councillor Dye, on that 50 hectare target, that we will be looking at beating up. We are committed and have some funding in place to get us to a point where these woodlands established. So it's something we will look to commit to do. And I think that I've talked already about that support that members can certainly offer, where I know members are acutely aware of the need to identify woodland creation sites and sites with tree canopy. And it's helpful that we can find a way in which we can engage with residents who I'm sure are supportive of the principles, but give us the opportunity to engage with them in a manner that is constructive, and we can look to develop sites within localities. So that continued support in that regard is, I think, what we're looking for. So it's equally encouraging for me as an officer, the feedback to members, how appreciative we are that we are able to have a good dialogue, and that members are able to support us doing that. We're talking to your constituents. So thank you. And I think that's the key for us as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. And that's a really useful point. I'm sure we can all, go and do that in terms of our contact with residents, and when we're in public meetings or situations where we have an opportunity. I suggest we all take that opportunity to spread the word and do what we can to support it. So thank you very much. Okay, thank you, Tony. That brings us to the end of our agenda. So thank you everybody for your time. Can I thank everybody for their contributions? I think we had some really good discussions and we've made some useful recommendations. So in my opinion, I think that was a worthwhile meeting. A huge thanks to officers who've done presentations and who've answered questions and who brought the meeting together. Really appreciative. And we will meet again on Monday, the 16th of October. In the meantime, can I just echo Councillor Anderson's comments and say, please do your very best to attend the working groups, because that's where we get an opportunity to discuss some of the things in more depth and make recommendations that we can bring to this full committee. So thank you very much. Thank you for your time, and go and enjoy what's left of the afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.